Hello and welcome to the Elemental Companion podcast. This is episode 2, and today we're going to be talking to CJ, who is over there very patiently waving. Good print. And of course, I'm your host, Heather, and honestly, we're just going to jump straight into this. So, CJ, who are you? What do you do?
Oh, okay. Well, I do quite a lot of things, I guess. Let's see. I have a passion for cooking, and I've worked in a bunch of restaurants in my life. I have, and currently am transitioning from being an active freelance graphic designer and web designer into full-time tabletop RPG streaming, which has been a recent thing and has been such a huge leap to change into. But I have a community of people that I've gathered as friends in the last couple of years that have all come to me because of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs. And I decided that I was focusing so much on it day to day that it seems silly to not just turn all of that passion into something I could just live for. And so I'm making it my business now.
Absolutely spot on, man. Like, I mean, you're speaking to me. This is a very similar thing in many ways. But yeah, I am all for that kind of transition.
I would say the thing that I do that is a bit, I don't know if it's different, but the way that I choose to run games. So other than the fact that it's become a bit of a running joke amongst me and my players is that everyone sort of uses our game time as a way to do some self-healing, throughout the week through whatever they've, whatever troubles they suffer from. My first group of friends that I started my very first DMing experience with ever, we actually all have a rather eclectic slew of actually diagnosed issues. And over the course of playing games with them for a very long time, they've all come to me and said, this helps me through my problem. And that's always such a wonderful thing. So that was the number one reason why I was like, even when I had bad weeks, I would just keep going because I'm like, this matters so much to so many other people. So I wanted to keep building on that. But I think the thing that helps them the most is that I run games that are very difficult. And I run games in a setting that I call it a living world, where even when, they're not actively sitting at the table, everybody else that exists in the world is thinking and doing and living their own lives. And so when they interact with individuals, or when they have and have since left, the developments that they've left behind in their wake evolve and change. And I take into consideration everything that all the outside influences that could have on that and how that will affect it. Because my eccentricity is that I have, this is not diagnosed, but I've had it forever. I have an anxiety issue where I have one issue and my brain goes, yeah, but what about this issue? And then what about this issue? And this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And it spirals out of control. I call it spider webbing. Because that's what it feels like. And I've actually learned in the last 5 to 6 years how to control it, mostly. Wow. And so I use that for storytelling. And so I go, okay, what about this? Well, how is this relevant? And then I think about all the things and the influences around it. So when player characters come into a scene and they interact with something and then they leave, I then spiderweb out that section and figure out all the various NPCs, governments, political power, like everything elsewhere in the world, how it influences it. And then they can come back and see it later, or even talk to someone, again, like 6 degrees of separation, kind of talk to someone somehow involved with it and they hear about it elsewhere. And it's not just, I didn't write that so they would have that experience. It's just how it developed. And it's all this influence, all this interaction that I consider to be difficult, because people have a hard time thinking on the same macro level that I can when my brain does that to me. And so they don't think about, the consequences, 6 steps down, versus even if they're thinking 3 steps down, they're not still all the way there. And so, there can be ramifications of decisions they don't quite realize, even when they're trying to predict them. And so they're constantly put into situations where something very difficult to solve or figure out happens, and then they have to go through the struggle of finding the answer. And I've seen so many great moments come from that, especially when I have one or two players that really embrace how difficult I make things occasionally, and they sit there and they think and they'll talk to me, and I say, yeah, I don't leave them hanging either. We work together because it's a group narrative, it's a story, it's what it's all about. And so I'll talk to them and give them as much input, or I'll talk them through as a sounding board. And those moments when they solve the problems, especially the ones where I'm like, I have no idea how you guys are going to fix this, and then they do, is the greatest reward I've ever had. And then I just see that how it transitions later into their lives, just like they're thinking now on a level when they're just interacting normally in their lives deeper than they were before.
Well, yeah, because they're building those skills in your game, right?
Yeah.
You learn something somewhere, it's going to be transferable. So that is really, really cool, actually. I'm sitting over here going like, oh, how do I play? This is the best. I don't know if you can tell. So, okay, do you have any specific stories where that's happened, or like funny anecdotes?
Okay.
I realize I am asking a game master this, and there are billions.
There are so many instances. Okay. Let's see. One of the most recent ones that I can think of is that my setting is very God-centric. And the gods are alive and interact with people regularly, and it's not unusual. So having an interaction with the deity is not commonplace, but it's not as odd as one might think. But I have one of my more powerful beings is a god of chaos. And I have a system where my players, at the end of every long rest or at any given point during a 24-hour period, can roll a D100 dice, and based off of that, they can have an interaction with an otherworldly being or some sort of power that they're involved with. Higher numbers are better, so 95 to 100, great. 5 and lower, not so great. And usually there's a negative repercussion of that, except with the fact where a 1 is rolled, I usually go, oh, the God of Chaos is going to do something to you because you rolled a 1 out of a D100, and that's so rare. So a long time ago, one of my players, who funnily enough has a thing with my settings God of Luck and rolls nothing but really good rolls a lot of the time, rolled the 1. And so I did this whole arc where I took them into another setting. I took them into a Forgotten Realms setting. I basically ran them through a Ravenloft arc for a bit because I quite like the Ravenloft lore and domains of Dread and all that stuff. It's so wonderful. Side note, if you read the Ravenloft books, if you haven't, I highly recommend them all. There are a bunch of great authors, and the stories are all great. So I ran them through that, and it was borrowing from Curse of Strahd. And I did it off of the back of a game that I played in that another one of my friends who was a player in my game ran for me. And then I did it in the future. So there was a bunch of like rippling effects that my party did that they got to see the outcomes of, which was really fun. But I played Strahd as a mastermind. He's super intelligent, very well thought out, very clever and deceptive. And he had this plan where they're trying to do all of these things to eventually get out, and they don't even know how they're going to accomplish that. And he's just subtly toying with them the entire time, down to the fact that one of their most trusted allies he'd been traveling with, he had been in disguise as the entire time. He found the ally at one point, killed him, and then took on his face, and then was acting as him for like 75% of the arc. And when they found that out, they lost their mind. But the thing that was the best, one of my players, his name is Ben. Ben is unique, and I won't go too great into his details because they're his business. But he has a very unique mental mindset that when he plays a character, he becomes the character.
Okay.
And he plays a character that they have a background that's dealt in a lot of politics and a lot of subtle deceptions, and it's called playing the game. And so when they got immersed in this and they realized what the bigger scheme was in this scenario, Ben and his character really took that to heart and started playing the long game, whereas everyone else was like, okay, what's the next objective? How do we get out of this situation? Whereas his character was constantly going, yeah, but how does this factor into the bigger picture? And was working on it the entire time. And eventually, after like 80% of the way through the arc, came to me like, all right, you're the game master. I can trust you, and I know you won't use this against me. And he explained his whole plan to me. And it was not short. It was a read, and it was wonderful. And I'm like, oh, he caught all of these little details that I thought no one got, and he put a lot of pieces together, and some he didn't. But by the end of it, when it finally came down to the last moment, the hardest decision to make in order for everyone to more or less get what they wanted, he was able to make when no one else could, because he was prepared for it. And I was so proud of him in that moment. For so many reasons, a couple of which I still can't talk about because they're his business, but him being able to overcome a lot of that and then share things with me, it was so good for him. And then mentally, he explained it to me later, because he's got some paranoia issues with his personal stuff. So the fact that he was like, with that initial share moment of his entire plan, I already knew out of game was a big step. Yeah. And like, I was really proud of him just watching him do that. And now he comes to me all the time, and I'm seeing these little breakthroughs in his condition with me specifically, which is it's really honestly, it's one of the things I love most about our relationship. We're great friends. And seeing these little things happen over the course of just playing in my game has made it so worthwhile. And I can see in moments, even when he has a bad time, the little tidbits that he's been able to pull away from this to help him fix his situation. And then even when he can't, he comes into the next game, and by the end of it, he's much better off.
Yeah. Now, I do know what you mean there, because like with my game that I'm running, obviously I built it to deal with business things, right? Mm-hmm. But I can distinctly remember when I was first running the beta thinking, yeah, I'm going to have sales coaching and we're going to have this game at the end because I really want to play the game, but it'll be like a reward for doing the work through the week. Mm-hmm. Naively thinking that was how that would go. I think it took like maybe one session, maybe a session and a half before I realized that no, one, we don't need separate sales coaching for anything ever. They're doing it in game. And two, holy crap, they're not just doing business things in game. Because like they were working on a lot of personal blocks and barriers as well. And you could see it play out. And like you said with Ben there, they do get better from week to week or through their different challenges. And it is so rewarding to watch. And it's great that you get that too, honestly. Mm-hmm. So, if someone wanted to follow you or find you online or watch your streams, where would they go?
Well, I'm in the midst of all my revamping, but my current social media at Twitter is Dire Wolfie, Dyre, Wolfie. Mm-hmm. And my Twitch stream is Dire, Dyre, the DM. Which these will be changing in the future as my business finishes transitioning, in which case all of my social media will be Dire Consequences with a Y.
Cool. What to do is I'll put them in the description down below, and when we change or when you change them over, I can just update them there. So people will be able to find you, because I feel your pain. Anyway. So I suppose with that, we should actually do what we're here to do. And that is figure out what your elemental companion is, right? Mm-hmm. So before we begin, do you have any guesses as to what it might be?
Well, I didn't know if I was supposed to do it before this podcast. So I've technically already done it once.
Okay.
I didn't guess correctly though what I initially thought, for what it's worth. I got a light elemental.
Okay, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. So that's probably not going to change if this was recent, but we'll go into more of the why, and you get more of an in-depth thing when I actually do it here anyway. But for the record, I do not mind people taking it before they come on. It's hilarious to me. So we'll just start that. You'll be familiar with the questions then. But
yes, I will.
Anyway, we will ask them and we'll go from there. So question one of the horrible questions. When you're procrastinating about selling or moving your business forward, what is the voice in your head saying to
you? This feels a lot like I have a huge checklist, and the voice in my head is saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this before you can move forward.
Okay.
And sometimes those list items are just not the ones I'm capable of completing, and so I have to find another set of list items to do.
Interesting.
So I have to micromanage my own goals, even if some of them are more important to get done sooner versus getting some done later.
Okay, so what's the sort of tone from those list items? Are they to do with anything specific, or, you know, is there a particular type of phrasing or mood?
Honestly, and this is one of my personal issues, it's starting something. So if whatever I designate needs to be done first, those are always the hardest things to do. So it's always easier that, because my brain, no matter what I tell myself, it goes, well, these are the first things you need to do. And those things are, for some reason, very scary for me to do. And so I cheat and I jump down the list a little because I'm like, well, I can do these and then get back to that later. And it works most of the time.
Yeah, fair enough. So do you find that they tend to be like, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Are they like specific items that would make sense on a to-do list out in the real world? Or are they things like, for example, be more confident? Or
definitely the former.
okay.
Yeah, I tell myself I need to be confident all the time, but that never makes it to a list.
Fair enough. So is it mainly the lists you get then? Or is there any other sort of inner voice going on?
It always comes down to, you need to do these things. And then I struggle to do those things. And then the understanding of trying to figure out why I'm incapable of doing those things. And it always either comes down to, I don't feel adequately prepared to chase after that goal yet.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm just not in the right, that's the same thing. I was going to say, I'm not in the right position to do it. And yeah, I feel unprepared. That's usually what it comes down to.
Okay. And do you have an inkling of what would happen if you did it while unprepared? Like, is it just a general dread, or?
Yes. The simple answer is, I'm afraid to fail or mess it up. And so that outcome can happen if I never do it.
Gotcha.
And I hate it. I hate this phenomenon so much, by the way, because I've narrowed this down after years upon years, and I know I have this issue, but I still have not been able to fix it.
I know the very one. So yeah, okay, fair enough. We'll go on to the other question then. So when you're feeling the need to make lists and work out your things, how do you resolve that feeling so that you can move forward?
Well, I try to take everything in small steps. Is the best way I find things. So I make my list, and at first it might be small because they're kind of broad items.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, how do I break these down to smaller list items to make it easier to accomplish? And so my lists kind of get this. And it kind of doubles back to my explaining spider webbing earlier. I try to figure out everything that influences this one little bullet point, and then I try to figure out what's the best way for me to handle each of those little things.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can find myself in a position where I can start checking off one of the things in the smaller sublist, I find it that I can start moving through all of them. And it's a matter of gaining momentum.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's interesting hearing you talk about it, and I'll explain my reasoning, but ironically, I think actually my quiz did get it right, and the elemental you need is a light elemental. However, I nearly went another way with this, because a lot of what you described is also quite typical of having an earth elemental running amok through your ship. So that would have given you an air elemental. Now, what we have, the way the elementals work, is there's the ones that are causing the problem in the pair, and they split naturally into pairs quite nicely, to be fair. So you have one over here, and it's usually overpowered and overemphasized, and that's where things get a bit screwy. And then you have the other one on the pair that is less listened to, and this is the one over here that you get given as your companion, because the idea with that is, hey, listen to this one a bit more and we'll balance it out somewhat. So, you know, that's why you would wind up with, if you were having earth problems, it would be air. If it was dark elemental problems, it would be light. And in your case, I reckon you probably have both to a degree, dark and earth. Mainly because we all have each of the elementals anyway. It's just whatever's currently causing the most issues that this will throw up. So the reason that it would have been dark, because it was very much earth, 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 earth. Oh, look, here it is. That's why. Is to do with the not wanting to start things because you don't want to fail. And that's speaking more to dark elemental, unhealthy, over-involved stuff, because that's really where your center of self-worth is. The way the dark and light elementals work is, one is your internal self-worth, your internal validation, your, yep, I am pretty solid with what I have going on, come at me, bro. Basically, that's your healthy dark elemental. And your light elemental, when they're, you know, working fairly well in harmony, are like, yeah, I can go out into the world and affect the things that happen, and there will be external rewards for the stuff I do. Fabulous. So they work hand in hand in that way. And when you have one misbehaving, in this case the dark one, it basically says to you, are we sure that we're allowed to do that? Are we sure that you know, we're the best person for this job? Are we sure that if we attempt this thing, it's going to work? So that's where that comes from. And what your light elemental says in response to that is, well, I mean, 1, you're fabulous. 2, look at all this evidence for your fabulousness. And 3, fuck all of it. Let's just do things in small steps. Come on, we can win. That's basically where it comes from. So I reckon I would probably agree that that's your main set. But because you're here and because it was such a thing, I'm going to tell you about your Earth one as well, because I think it's important. And especially if you have 2 that are enacting quite strongly, they will then work together to create a bigger thing. So I'll explain how it works, and then I'll tell you how it's interacting. Earth elementals are typically about having strong foundations and, you know, tilled earth in which to grow, basically. They're the nurturing, growing, blah, 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 blah. The way it's meant to be, and that you would assume of earth, right? Air, on the other hand, is your creative ideas, your pulling things out of thin air, basically, putting stuff together, making patterns, so on. When Earth is misbehaving, as it is just now, it shows up as a tendency to want to control everything. My internet just cut out, didn't it?
It did for a moment, yes.
Oh, that's very annoying. Okay. Where did we get to? I think we had the air elemental. No,
control. That was about where we finished.
Your earth elemental very much, when it's unhappy and scared, wants to take hold of as much control as it can and impose as much structure as it can on everything. It will make endless lists. It will make lists upon lists upon lists. But it'll also get really quite rigid in terms of this is the way we do something. We're going to check this stuff off. We must have these routines. We must have this way of being in the world. And what it does, if it's left to its own devices, is it will start pulling on the other elementals too and be like, no, we cannot have that much free thought because we have a list over here that says we need to do these things, for example. Which is fun for everybody, but that's if it's misbehaving. In response to that, what air tends to say is, what? You're being ridiculous, mainly is what it says. But it tends to come at it from a standpoint of, nobody knows that you don't have your shit together. We can't see it. We only see this stuff over here. And also, your ideas have merit. Your process has merit. What you're doing already has inherent merit and value and worth, and people need to see it. So let's go talk about it some more. Over here, with people out in the world. It's basically that, no, you're ready to be talking about this. I don't care if you think you're qualified. Elemental there. So those are your two. When Earth and Dark get together and have a slumber party of misery, what happens with that, very quickly, is you have Earth trying to impose endless structure and control. Because if you don't, we're going to drive off a cliff and nobody will ever see us again. Yep.
That's absolutely correct.
It's a bitch. And I can say this with complete clarity because you won't have seen the first podcast episode yet. But the first elemental I had problems with was the Dark Elemental, followed by the Earth Elemental, and now I've moved on to Water, bizarrely, because they do change as you change things. So believe me when I say I understand this particular mesh pretty well. So much so that I have learned that when light and air get together, one, the visual for that is actually really quite funny because it's a sun with a fluffy cloud, just so you know, that's how this looks. But what that basically says is, nope, we're worth it. We have proof that you're worth it. If you are not sure that you are worth it based on all this proof we have out in the world here, you can go and talk to people about the thing and they'll affirm it for you. And by the way, we should just be doing stuff. Is more or less the side they come from.
I like this too a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, it helps that they are, in fact, not throwing the toys out the pram at the moment. But that's their response to this other thing that's going on here.
I have a lot to unpack for myself later.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But in a good way, I'm taking away so much from this.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that we could help there. That's the one thing about the free quiz that it won't tell you is the entire rest of why we get these results. But, yep, that's where we are.
Pretty happy with that, to be honest with you.
Well, that's good, and I'm glad. And I won't nudge you too much about it because there is processing that needs to be done here now that you've heard. So what I will do is wrap things up here. Is there anything else you want to say to the viewers before we sign off this stuff?
Nothing specific other than I'm gonna quote one of my favorite personalities, which is just don't forget to love each other. That's it.
Fair enough. It's a really good note to end on. So, okay, guys, in that case, I will wrap this up here. If you want to take the free quiz that we were talking about earlier, you can find that over at salesrpg.com. I will put the link in the description there. And if you too want to come and be on the podcast, I have the link for that in the description as well. Take care. Bye, peeps.